Today we are interviewing the Right Honourable Alistair Darling. Thank you for meeting us today, Mr Darling. We are 14 and 15-year-olds from the Mary Erskine School who will be eligible to vote if the 16-year-olds are given the vote in 2014. The reason for our visit is because of a project we are involved in at school, the BBC News School Report. We have chosen the topic of Scottish referendum and 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds giving the vote.
So what would you say your opinion is on 16 and 17-year-olds being able to vote?
I'm quite happy with 16 and 17-year-olds being able to vote, although I do think that if 16 and 17-year-olds are allowed to vote in a referendum, they should also be allowed to vote in every other election. In other words, you can't pick and choose. And people wondered why suddenly the Scottish Government wanted 16 and 17-year-olds to vote for this one. They didn't want them to vote in other elections. But I think you've got to be consistent. But I don't have any problem with 16 and 17-year-olds being able to vote, especially in a thing like this, which is going to affect, whatever the result is going to affect you for a sizable chunk of your life.
Yeah, so you do agree that we, 16 and 17-year-olds, will have to deal with the consequences of this vote and other votes?
Well, if Scotland were to vote to become independent, then you will live with the consequences of that for the rest of your life, and so will your children and grandchildren if you have them. Whereas it's slightly different for sort of normal elections, if you like. If you vote in a government in a general election and you don't like them, 5 years later you can kick them out and get another lot in. But a referendum on the future of Scotland is entirely different because if you want to vote for independence, you only have to win once. After that, there's no going back. It's irrevocable. So it's a big, big decision for everybody, not just people who've just turned 16.
Yeah, and do you think that 16 and 17-year-olds have enough knowledge and information to make a sensible decision on the vote for independence?
Yeah, but well, put another way, I don't believe that a 16-year-old can never know enough to be able to vote. But like everybody else, you have to bring to bear your own judgment as to what you think is best, and that would apply whether you're 16 or 66. So I don't think there's any reason why a 16-year-old can't make his or her mind up about these things. I mean, after all, legally you can get married at 16. I would strongly advise you never to do that. But you can get married at 16. You can drive a car at 17. So of course you've got that intelligence. But as I say, I think you need to be consistent about this. But the Scottish Government's decided it's just for this referendum. So let's just get on with it.
Yeah. So you'll agree that 16-year-olds are maybe lacking on information in politics and the referendum in particular. So how do you think the government and possibly the Better Together campaign will reach them?
Well, I'm not sure they are lacking in information any more than the rest of the population is. We do a lot of, in Better Together, we do a lot of opinion polling. And if you look at the population right across the piece, from 16-year-olds to 96-year-olds, people say we want to know more. So there's nothing, it's not peculiar to one particular age group. But I think in terms of, well, how do you communicate that information? What is true is that we know that people of your age are more likely to get your information through social media or on the internet than your granny is. Because your granny is more likely to still be buying a newspaper. Now, of course, they're all important. It just means that in this campaign, where, unlike general elections, where political parties tend to concentrate on a handful of voters and a handful of marginal seats, constituencies that might change, this one, it doesn't matter where you live in Scotland, whether you're 16 or 106. You have a vote, and your vote counts equally. So that's why we've got to try and get information to people, no matter how we do it.
Yeah. So could you explain, possibly in basic terms, what 16-year-olds will be voting for?
Well, basically you're voting for whether or not you want the country in which you live, Scotland, to remain as part of the United Kingdom with a relationship with the other three countries in the Union, or whether you think Scotland would be better, or whether it should be a separate country and have the same relationship to England as, say, France or Latvia has to England. So it's making a big, big change, because at the moment, most of us are fiercely proud of being Scottish. We're also proud of being British, and we don't want to choose between the two. You do have to make a choice on this, in the referendum. There are people who honestly believe that it is so, there's such a difference that we'd be better being, completely separate. Of course, no one's saying you wouldn't be able to cross the border or to sell things, buy things from England or all the rest of it, but it is quite a fundamental change.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you some questions about the 2014 referendum. So we know that the bill for 16 and 17-year-olds voting has been submitted but is yet to be debated, passed and implemented. Are you going to have any involvement in this process?
No, because it will be decided by the Scottish Parliament. And part of the agreement was that the Westminster would make sure that there was a legally binding framework to have a referendum. It's the Scottish Parliament then got to decide. And one of the big things it's got to decide is how to ensure that everybody who will be 16 and 17 years old at the qualifying date is actually on the register, because at the moment, whether or not you get onto the register is largely whether or not your mum and dad remember to put your name on it. And so I think that the Scottish Government has a duty, now that it's led people to believe they're going to get the vote, to make sure they actually get it. Because it would be a tragedy if you get 16-year-olds turning up on the day saying, "Where's my ballot paper?" People say, "Well, you're not on the register."
Why are you fighting to keep Scotland and the rest of the UK together?
Because I think we're, for three reasons really. One is, in terms of jobs, if you take firms in Edinburgh, for example, like the big insurance companies or the banks and so on, most of their customers are in England, they're not in Scotland. And if you start putting any barrier or any difficulty in the way, that's going to make their things more expensive. And the same applies, throughout Scotland. We sell 4 times as much to England as we do to the rest of Europe. So it's important. The second thing, I think, is in terms of our influence. As the UK, we have a lot of influence, for example, in the European Union. And, I was a minister for 13 years, and I can tell you it's the big countries that call the shots in Europe, it's not the small countries. I think the third thing is important. Well, we in some ways we have the best of both worlds. For example, in your education, education policy is decided 100% by the Scottish Parliament. But our universities, for example, have access to UK research funds, and actually Scottish universities get more money than you'd expect, given the relative size of the population or student numbers, and that's a huge benefit to Edinburgh University, for example. So the best of both worlds, and of course overall, why do I need to choose between being Scottish and British when I can be both?
If Scotland become independent, how would it affect your personal life?
Well, we're all going to carry on living. It's not whether the lights would go off. I think it's a thing in time. How would it affect my life? It would be the standard of living, the amount of money that Scotland could generate to pay for the things that we like or the jobs it can provide. Now, I just think that I've never argued that Scotland couldn't go it alone on its own, and most countries can. We'd be very, very heavily dependent, though, on North Sea oil tax revenue, which is notoriously volatile. It goes up and down. In 1 year it can change by the equivalent of all the money we spend in education in Scotland, so it's a big, big difference. And that would worry me, because if you're very dependent on one source of income, you're very vulnerable to things that can happen to you over which you've got no control.
Yeah, thank you. If Scotland become independent, how would it affect your job?
Well, I don't know, because obviously I'm an MP now. If we were not part of the United Kingdom, we would not be sending MPs to Westminster. It would all be decided in the Scottish Parliament, and who knows what shape or size the Scottish Parliament would have after that. At the moment, the Scottish Parliament, for example, only has one chamber, and when you've got one party running it, it's pretty much a one-party state, whereas in Westminster, most countries, you have 2 chambers. So, we'll just have to see what will happen.
We hear about the effect of independence in Scotland, but how would it affect the rest of the UK?
Well, the rest of the UK, the difference would be Scotland wouldn't be part of it. There's a legal argument going on as to which state would carry on as the United Kingdom. I think it would pretty much carry on as it is. Obviously, I think it would be the poorer in every sense of not having Scotland, because I think we, as the United Kingdom, have achieved an awful lot more than any of the single countries have done on their own. For example, if you look at the NHS, for example, was developed by a Welshman, the BBC was funded by a Scotsman, the Bank of England was actually set up by a Scotsman as well. So we all have contributed, and I think we'd all be the poorer, frankly. And you have to ask yourself, why are you doing this? What is it you're going to gain as a result of it? And that's something I just haven't seen the answer to.
Is there anything else you'd like us to know for the report?
I think the most important thing and the best thing you could do is to make sure these things are debated. What's encouraging is an awful lot of schools throughout Scotland are now discussing the issue of independence and the referendum. Something that in politics isn't often discussed at school, because it's all very difficult for your teachers to make sure you can't be biased one way or another. But a thing like this, you'd be missing a huge opportunity, because I hope we will have this one referendum and make a decision one way or another, which means you won't be discussing it again, certainly not when you're at school.